Hello and welcome to the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast with me, Clive Barber, and my good mate, Noel Tom. For the days when you can't ride your bike, there's always the Trail and Adventure Motorbike Podcast. Welcome back to another exciting episode. An episode in which Noel says, it's like having an interest in the solar system and then meeting someone that's actually been to space. I don't know why he talks like that, he just does. And then he compares himself to John McGuinness. This is a great episode, fascinating stuff with an ex-TT and British superbike racer called Gordon Blackley. He is a relative newcomer to adventure, enduro and trials riding, but he's got some great stories. Right, let's get on with it.
How did you end up riding the Enfield recently, Gordon?
Basically, my wife is very short, 5'2", and she can ride almost no bikes. She had a Himalayan, the 411 Himalayan, which was okay, but it kind of annoyed me because it was made of kind of toffee and sticky back plastic. She swapped it quite sensibly for an Audi convertible, which she loves. But she's been talking to me ever since about the idea that it might be a good idea to get a bike that we can both ride. Went and had a sit on a Transalp. That was a non-starter, too tall. Disappointingly. Then new Himalayan came out and I thought, well, I'll give it a go. Went up there, rode it on the road at first, and I thought, well, it's kind of okay. Good on the road, like surprisingly good on the road. Real peppy engine, a lot more power than I thought. But I'd watched Nathan Millwood's take on it, and he was talking about it not having a grunt and so on and so forth. So I took it off-road, much to the disgust of the dealer when it came back covered in mud. Took it off-road, and in the easier off-road, I found that it was exactly what Nathan had said. It was kind of a bit hesitant and a bit not hesitant. That's the wrong word. It was just felt like it wouldn't have the low down grunt that you might expect. And then after a while, I realized that it was the fly-by-wire throttle. And when you just give it a little bit more throttle, the thing sorts itself out. Or when it needs to lug, then the ECU sorts it out and it just does lug. I was really impressed with that actually for what it is. Far better quality than the previous bike.
You did an excellent online review of it. I just wondered how you found it kind of fielding the comments that have come in.
Well, it's a funny place, the internet, isn't it? No matter what you try, I put on there a really simple, this might be a decent tech bike contender, or words to that effect.
You posted it on the tech page, hadn't you?
Originally, what I did was there's an adventure group which has got HP2 Mav in it, Biker Ed, a few others, and so I basically just blasted it on there so that they could see what I thought of it. And then obviously I got the piss taken out of me massively because that's what happens on that group. And then when I put it on Facebook, I thought, you know what, this would be a decent thing to put on the tech group. Useful for people to see that there's a decent option down there. Somebody made some comment which was effectively words to the effect of, why should we listen to you? What experience have you got? Or what you compare it? It was something like that. And I thought,
we will address that question.
Well, you don't want to be that guy. I'm not known for my modesty. So I thought, right, let's put on there a few bits and bobs. So I did. And then, of course, the next thing is somebody came back. I think Clive, you saw the comment, which was some guy talking about me beating my chest about being whatever, the next Clark Kent. It was a bit of a weird Superman reference. Took a big sigh. I was like, oh my God. You try to go in one direction of the modesty, which is not my natural area at all. And then you think to yourself, well, I'll just kind of dip a toe in the water of telling them, here's the perspective. Here's, enduro rider, Pirelli test rider, all that kind of stuff. Missed out the whole Isleman TT British Superbike stuff. And then, of course, I'll get a hard time for being immodest, which was fair.
But listener, let me tell you, Gordon Blackley, who is our guest today, has, as far as I know, he may correct us later on, 9 top 10 TT finishes, including a 5th place. And he spent 3 years in the British Superbike Championship. He can ride a bit.
Gordon Blackley, former British Superbike and Isleman TT racer, who has now ended up in the world mainly of adventure riding, with a little bit of trials and enduro over the years, I guess.
How did you originally get into bikes? Were you riding as a kid? Did you have a parent that got you into bikes?
One of my earliest memories is looking out the window and watching my dad go to work on a motorbike. So I weirdly revisited that house at about age 43 on a 1150 GS and looked out the same window at my 1150 GS out the window, which was kind of cool. Almost got beaten up by the owner when I was outside taking photographs. My parents rather stupidly decided that it was a good idea to have a motorbike. My dad was going to have a motorbike until I was about 13 and take me on the back and take me to school and stuff. So I was at a private school. Not that did my education very good at all. People would turn up in Porsches and Sierra Cosworths and Rolls Royces and God knows what, and we'd get a whole load of attention for turning up on a horrible 400cc parallel twin Suzuki with a Rickman fairing on the front, which was, I look back on it, it was really cool at the time, but I look back on it and go, that was shit, Dad. What were you thinking? This is in the age of Suzuki Katanas and stuff like that, and he bought this thing, but I guess he probably had less money than I imagine he had at the time. The previous bike had been a Jawa two-stroke, which I can always remember when he picked that up. Then we got to the point where my dad thought, oh, hang on a minute, he's going to be into motorbikes. We don't want him to be into motorbikes because he's a fucking idiot. So what he decided to do was to sell his bike, try and put me off the idea. We'll help you buy a car, but we won't help you buy a bike. So obviously, quick as a flash, I went out and bought a little Yamaha RXS 100 for 325 whole English pounds. But all my friends had far better bikes and everything, which I guess is probably where you learn to ride, isn't it? When all your friends have got faster bikes and you try and keep up.
No, without Googling the bike, I'm imagining it looked a bit like the bike out of the first Mad Max film with the fairing on it.
It was a GSX 400N, I want to say, something like that. Parallel twin. It was all right. It seemed all right. And then he put this fairing on it, which was also blue. The bike was like a nice metallic blue with a bit of gold pinstriping. And then he put this blue fairing on it, which didn't remotely match the colour of the bike. It was vaguely blue. And to me, as a 10, 11, 12, it was the coolest thing in the world. And it was really fast as well. It was like crazy fast. Probably because it used to try and rip the open face helmet. You remember those helmets with the shit Bob Heath visor? Kind of went down to about your nose.
No, I've still got one.
And then as you went faster, the helmet would try and suck off the back of your head. Not looking very cool at all back then.
This sort of happened to me today because I went out on my 1150 GS and thought, oh, it's a nice day, I'll just wear my Trials helmet. But that has a little visor that comes down, and the wind that comes in and pushes your eyelids up, probably the same kind of thing. Your dad, did he have this bike because he just wanted something to commute on, or would he have ridden it for pleasure as well?
He started off with like Honda C90s, and I've seen a photograph of it from this house in Wales. It was on Anglesey, RAF Valley. We could see Snowdon out the back, so that was quite cool. There's a photograph of me as a small child wearing a plastic police helmet. Again, looking at Dick. There's a theme here, isn't there? And my dad's in massive flares in the 70s. And I'm trying to climb on this bike in the back garden. And I look at it now, and it looks like a CD200 Bentley or something like that. I think it was a 175 or something. But I remember him selling it to a friend and then telling me that the engine had blown up. And as a small child, I'm like 3-4 years old. To me, it's blown up. There's been a huge explosion, like off an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, and like the guys, the pieces of him have gone everywhere. I was like, holy shit! My dad's like killed somebody.
As a teenager then on the road, were you one of these absolute nutcases? Because presumably you made a transition from having like a moped to thinking, I'm quite good at this, I should have a go at racing. Were you just tearing up the tarmac?
You know, kids back in those days had cool mopeds like a Fizzy and stuff like that did 70 mile an hour. Well, I was not that kid. My mum had a Suzuki FZ50, which was an orange thing with little white leg protectors. It had a top box, an orange top box, made of fiberglass. I found that out when I smashed it up, chasing a rabbit. Well, that's the story I told her anyway. I think it had a shopping basket on the front. So she lent me this bike and obviously expected to get it back. And that didn't work out well for her. I get this bike and I'm in Watton High Street in Norfolk. A police car comes up behind me. I've got L plates on. They love to stop people with L plates, right? Police car comes up behind me. The lights light up. Well, I've seen it on the telly. So Dukes of Hazzard, I was an avid Dukes of Hazzard fan. So if the police are behind you, you leg it, don't you? It's as simple as that. So I did. And the police car that he was in was an XR 4x4. So I go round a couple of corners and obviously he sat there behind me going, what the hell is this kid doing on I'm doing 32 mile an hour downhill with the following wind.
I would encourage anyone to Google this bike to add to this story because it's a cute little thing, isn't it? But it's not the kind of thing you would choose for a police chase.
I found out later that it was the fastest car on the Norfolk fleet. It was a Sierra XR 4x4. The bottom line was when I went through the bollards, so he expected me to turn left on this road and there was a set of bollards on a footpath and I just went lined it straight through these bollards, flat out, full 32, maybe and a half miles an hour. And I go through these bollards and he's screwed. He can't keep up with me. Then I was obviously quite a clever lad because what I decided to do, it was about a mile long, this footpath. So I go to the end of the footpath and I turn back. I've legged it now. I've done it. I've seen the Dukes of Hazzard. That's the end of it. And so I turned back onto the same road that I was on and come back in the opposite direction. And then I was really surprised to find that I almost had a head-on with the same XR 4x4 with his blue lights on, as he'd figured out where I'd gone and had come to get me. So I did shit myself as I almost became a bonnet emblem on this car. I get hauled into the police station, huge bollocking. My dad gets called and they go off into a back room, and I'm like, oh my God, they're plotting my demise and so on and so forth. What turns out to happen is that this copper is standing there holding his sides laughing, and he went, you're not going to believe this. I'm in the fastest car in the Norfolk fleet. Your son outran us on this FZ50 with the shopping basket in the top box. And he said he outran me. He said, thank God I caught him. I never would have lived it down.
What had you thought you'd done wrong?
The funny thing is, I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't doing anything wrong at all. So, in the 80s, they just stopped you and just made sure that you were insured and taxed and all that kind of thing, because they didn't have the computerized malarkey back then, did they? So that's what he was doing. And so I don't know why I legged it. It just because I'd seen it on the telly, and that's what you do, right? So that was the beginning.
Ridiculous. What was the transition then to becoming Gordon the racer?
As a young kid, there was a bike shop, massive bike shop in Watton called Lings Honda. And I used to go in there, and I can remember bikes like the NS400R. I'd stand there drooling over this thing. And there was the RC30 eventually came out and was sat on a plinth in there. And I'm kind of 13 years old standing there, wow, and annoying the hell out of the salesman, I'm sure. I transitioned from the mighty FZ50 onto the RXS 100. And I obviously do all sorts of crazy stuff to the engine on that, none of which actually had any effect, I don't think, but a little bit of an effect. And then sort of learn to ride a bit on that. Back then, as soon as you pass your test, you could buy anything. I sold that, bought a GPZ 305. That was a terrible bike, absolutely bloody awful. And then somebody taught me, and I thank this person, I can't remember who he was, but a sergeant on the training course I was doing, and he said, why don't you just buy an RD 350? I was looking at a GSX 600 fully fed thing, looked a bit like a teapot. And he scoffed at this and he said, just buy an RD 350 power valve. So I did. Best bike I ever owned. Absolutely fantastic. And what I would do was I just enjoyed going fast. Somebody would go past me and that was not happening. Nobody ever went past me and stayed there. That was the bottom line. And I didn't actually know that I was fast. I just knew that I enjoyed going fast and that nobody would ever stay in front of me. Fast forward to me I was in the Air Force at the time, but I'm now in the shit regularly in the Air Force for wheeling past air traffic control, wheeling past the Battle of Britain Memorial flight where they have the Spitfires and Lancasters and stuff, overtaking somebody while sideways on the grass. I think that was in a Land Rover, but still over enthusiastic behavior with vehicles. And the squadron leader calls me in and he went, Blackley, I never have any trouble with you until you've got a set of handlebars or a steering wheel in your hands. He said, why don't you go and do something useful with it? So I went off and I tried to become a sidecar passenger because, that was the easiest thing to do. And there was a guy who needed a sidecar passenger. So just at the point when this was going to happen, he had an enormous crash. I don't exactly know what happened there, but somehow he had an enormous crash and the whole thing was not going to happen. Turned out that the RAF motorbike racing champion, who was a British superbike guy or whatever they called it back then, and he was on base. So I went and spoke to him and went, kind of fancy getting into racing. How would I do such a thing? And I'm sat in his kitchen 1 minute, and then literally 2 weeks later, I'm on the grid at Cadwell Park on this shitty old jelly mold CBR with a fairing that was made out of P40. You remember the old body filler? And this fairing weighed so much that if you had it on the bike, it never wheelied. But if you took it off the bike to test it, it would wheelie like hell. So I went out the first weekend, and I can remember started the race. Basically, I was wallying around somewhere in the midfield, and Sandra Barnett, who was the fastest ever lady around the TT, her husband, Peter, was out in the race, and he's on a GPZ 500, which was a bit of a, I don't know what it was. It's not a cool bike, is it, So I'm on a CBR 600, and he kept overtaking me. And when he overtook me, I was just incensed. I was like, that's not happening. So I'd go flying back past him, and then I'd slow back down again. The guy who was the RAF champion, he kind of got me at one side and he went, mate, you're riding a little bit strangely. He said, what you're doing is as soon as somebody's come past you, you pretty much double your speed and then you slow back down again. You're riding like a road rider. How about imagine everyone on the grid has flicked you the V's as they've just come past you. It was a 2-day meeting. So the first day I was walling around the midfield. The second day, I imagined exactly that. And I went out and I'm leading the race for the first 2 laps. And I'm honestly crapping myself. I'm thinking everyone's pulled off the track, and I'm just riding around like an idiot on my own. I thought that was going on, and finally somebody comes past me. A couple of riders come past me with a hairpin. Thank God for that. There's other riders out here. So, and then the race began, and I was something like third on my second ever day of racing. So his advice was pretty good. Just imagine everyone flicked you the V's.
Were you always thinking about technique when you were racing? What made you sort of immediately become pretty good at it?
There was a little leaflet on Performance Bikes magazine. It was kind of a leaflet attached to the outside of it, which was called How to Ride Fast and Survive. And it was some little dotted lines showing you how to go through corners and in wide and slow and out fast, that kind of thing. So basically just started to do that on the road and found that it made me quite fast. And so I carried on doing it on the track. And it was really as simple as that. I guess I just kind of became fast through that technique. And I was quite a thinking rider, which I guess is how I ended up as the development rider for Pirelli. Once I sort of got reasonably good at it, I would kind of analyze the technique and how to go fast. I think you have riders who are just out and out talented, and they just will go fast no matter what, but they have no idea how they go fast. And then you've got some who are analytical, and you've got some that have got a bit of both.
The forces obviously encourage people to do sports outside of the forces. What do the services get out of people doing sports?
It's what we call part of the offer. So if you join up and it's just a job, it probably doesn't pay as well as other jobs do outside. It's ultimately perhaps not the best of lives, because of course they're sending you all over the place and you're having to work crazy hours sometimes and so on and so forth. So they really encourage sport, and they really encourage participation in sport and that kind of thing. But ultimately, when they get somebody who's pretty good at it, then they then get to sort of advertise that fact to the outside world. Where I used to go to the British Superbikes and compete there, we would have a thing called a mobile recruiting office, which basically means a van with some posters and stuff. And they would turn up at each and every one of the meetings, and then they'd try and get people to join the Air Force. And actually, we ended up with a guy who was a 12-year-old kid peering over the Armco at Brands Hatch. He ended up then joining the Air Force as a result of exactly that. So there was an absolute tangible output. He then became, oddly, the next RAF champion.
So let's talk a little bit of the highlights of your motorcycling career, because I'll be honest, Gordon, I met you a couple of years ago at the first Lightweight Festival. I think we'd swapped a few messages before then. The joke has always been, is Gordon, he used to race a bit. I didn't know quite how much you did used to race until I did a little bit of online research. Fuck me, you were really good, weren't you?
To be honest, it's one of those strange things where people will, I'm obviously enthusiastic about motorbikes, as we all are, and I'll talk about the things that I used to do with enthusiasm. I do it less now than I used to. I used to be like, hi, I'm Gordon and I race superbikes. And that was the intro to everything. I've calmed down a bit since then. There's been quite a few times when I've spoken to somebody and I've told them maybe 20% of what I did. I started up a motocross club over at RF Huntington Motocross and Enduro Club. And this guy was standing in my office. He was talking about helping me out and running the club and so on and so forth. And we just got chatting, and I mentioned some of the stuff I used to do, and I probably gave him about 20% of what I used to do. And he came up to me the next day. He went, mate, I owe you an apology. He said, because I absolutely walked out thinking you were full of shit and there's no way you could have done all that stuff. I went off, I Googled you, and he said, and you told me about 20% of what you'd done. Whilst I massively play up to it, hi, I used to race, all that kind of stuff. It does feel sometimes a little bit annoying when you go, if you just punch it into Google, you might see that some stuff happened.
To save any false modesty, you were racing in the era of Guy Martin, Michael Rutter. Did you actually race Joey Dunlop?
I've raced Joey Dunlop. I've raced John McGuinness. I've beaten John McGuinness around the TT. I've beaten Dave Jeffries around the TT. I've beaten Bruce Anstey around the TT. To be fair, I've not beaten them all at the same moment, which is the trick, right? Because then you win. When they've had a really bad day and I've had a really good day, then that's when I've beaten them. And to be fair to Dave Jeffries, I mean, he was a giant. He was like 6'3" and built like a gorilla. We were on production 600s that day. And so to be fair, he was probably 10 mile an hour slower than me down every straight. John McGuinness, I beat him in one race and he beat me in 32 races around the TT. So don't get me wrong, I wasn't right up there, but up there and in amongst the legends. And Joey Dunlop, amazing rider. I remember sat on the start line at the TT and somebody came up and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, watch out for your man. And I went, what are you talking about? He said, just look over your shoulder. So I'm sat on what the hell was it? It was a 19 97, I want to say, Thunder Ace, Yamaha Thunder Ace, which was like, when you see surfers on the sea and they're on those longboards where they run to the front, run to the back. So somebody my size, I'm not the biggest guy, somebody my size on this Thunder Ace, so it felt like that because you just couldn't get the weight transfer right. It was massive. It was enormous. Joey Dunlop was behind me and he's on the factory RVF. And I'm like, ooh, holy shit. Go into the course. We're going into Greber Bridge. And as we're going into Greber Bridge, he passed me in the cleanest way I've ever been passed the TT. He just breezed past without affecting my line in any way, shape or form. And then I followed him through the next set of bends, which is quite technical, which takes you down to, the crossroads on the George Formby film where he goes through the hotel, he rides through the hotel, takes us down to there. Well, I pretty much nearly went through the hotel because when I hit the brakes at my normal place, I'd been following Joey through this set of corners. It was only my second time at the TT. And I hit the brakes at the same moment I had done. And I'm going 10 mile an hour faster, 20 mile an hour faster. And I nearly went through the bloody hotel myself. And as I went across the crossroads and stopped and turned round, this marshal laughing went, "You've tried to follow Joey, didn't you?" And I went, "Yeah."
You're consistently top 10. You've got a 5th, a couple of 7th, a number of 8ths and a couple of 9ths position as well. So you were pretty much right up there.
Like I say, just didn't have the trick of beating everyone the same day. I like to think I rode like a crap version of Joey Dunlop, because what he would do if you ever watched him was if it was all feeling right and it was a good day and he went down Bray Hill, he'd win the race. Whereas if it was all feeling right and it was a good day for me, I'd maybe be 5th, 6th, 7th.
If anybody doesn't know what the TT is, I can't believe anybody listening to this podcast doesn't know what the TT is. The Isle of Man Tourist Trophy. You're riding round country lanes, you're riding through cities, you've got hedgerows, you've got dry stone walls, you've got all the road furniture that we're used to seeing, and you're averaging over they average over 130 miles, average over 130 miles an hour now.
It's a thing that this is what fascinates me about it, is it's a thing that just shouldn't exist. It still exists. It's just unbelievable to me.
And it's just as dangerous now as it ever was, right?
But that's what I wanted to ask Gordon, was what's it like going from a sort of a track racing career to that first time you race at the TT?
It's all about circuit knowledge, to be honest. As soon as you know the circuit, and when I'm talking about knowing the circuit, you've got 325 corners, give or take. In some of those corners, you'll know that if you go 4 inches to the left, you'll miss a bump, and 4 inches to the right, you'll hit it and it'll kick the bike off. You've got to know that level of detail. It takes about 4 years really to get to know it. And to be honest, in my early years, I look back to, I won the Manx Grand Prix, which is kind of like the TT but without the factory bikes. So I won that in 97. In those early days, I was really pushing it beyond what was quite right. I thought I was riding safely, but I look back at it and go, yeah, you know what, mate, you were a little bit beyond the limit there.
And as an older man now, do you look back at it and wince a little bit?
Yeah, hell yeah. My kids, I kept it top secret from my kids that I raced the TT. Literally, nobody was allowed to talk about it. And as they've got older and they've just picked up on conversations, and when I was doing a trials event, I bumped into another Manx Grand Prix winner, and of course we got talking, and the boys were like, hang on a minute, you used to race this, didn't you? In fact, why is that photo on the wall?
You kept it from them because you thought they might use it as some kind of bargaining tool or something.
I was terrified that they would go and race it, because they both of them been racing motocross since they were 5, 6, whatever it was. A bit of mini moto chucked in there and now trials. And I was terrified that they'd go, that's really cool. Because when you're at that age where you think your dad's cool, it soon finishes, I'm sure. But when you think your dad's cool, and I just thought, if they're in those formative years and they think that I did the TT, then they're going to think it's cool for them to do it, and then they'll die, bottom line. And there's a friend of mine who his son ended up dying at the TT. Father and 2 sons raced at the TT, and one of his sons is no more, and he still races. I don't know how he does it.
Did you have any serious iffy moments?
The scariest moment I had was I had my throttle stick on the run down into Ramsey, and really bumpy section of road. Fortunately, I'm on a CBR 600, not the fastest thing on the planet, but my throttle stuck wide open. I kind of hit the kill switch, and that sort of killed it. And then I sort of wiggled the throttle and hit the kill switch again, and it was still flat out. And oh my god! And I sort of sorted this all out, and then eventually whatever stone or whatever had jumped into the throttle mechanism jumped back out again, and I carried on, and that was that.
I feel bad that we've spent so much time talking about the TT on the Trail and Adventure Motorbike podcast. It's like having an interest in the solar system and then meeting someone who's been into space. It is amazing to talk to someone who's actually ridden in this thing. I do this thing, and then I once saw a documentary about John McGuinness and realised he did the same thing. If I'm going on a bike trip, I cut the grass, and I cut the grass like it might be the last time the grass gets cut, but it needs to, I just want to leave the lawn in a nice state before I go on a trip that I might not come back from. Did you have any kind of little thing that you did?
Before you answer this, Gordon, Noel, have you just compared yourself to John McGuinness?
Yes, I have.
No, there was none of that weird shit going on, frankly. I did have a letter written to my then girlfriend, now wife, that was hidden somewhere where people would find it if the worst happened. And so there was a very real realization that it was absolutely possible, indeed probable. I mean, 3 people die a year. That's with 300 competitors, that's a 1% chance of dying. It's a lot, isn't it? You don't want to do that. But I think back then, I didn't have any kids. It was a really cool thing to do. And having come from being a road rider, can you imagine? I mean, there's a village called Kirkmichael in the middle of the TT. When you see this on onboard footage, it doesn't really look like much. There's lots of houses going past you and so on and so forth. If you go and ride it, and you try to ride it down the high street of Kirkmichael in the middle of the day, you're lucky if you do 35 mile an hour because it's sort of tight and it's twisty and there's a few cars parked and stuff like that. Well, we're doing about 170, 180 mile an hour down there. On the side of the road, you've got pieces of rope where it's real old school, pieces of white rope which rope it off. And standing behind the white rope is a policeman who's roped off the road. And I couldn't help because I'm come from being a road rider and I'm there with a policeman cheering me on as I'm going through a 30 limit at 180 miles an hour. I couldn't help it. So the first sort of couple of times I can remember flicking them the V's as I went past because you're like, yes, fuck you, I'm going really fast through Kirkmichael.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because when I talk to non-bikers about the TT, it's going like, I love motorbikes, I love going fast. There's no way in a million years I would even dream of doing something like that. It sounds like even in your younger years, you knew how dangerous it was. You knew the potential of having a very serious, potentially fatal accident. What is the mindset that pushes you on to still want to do it?
I was short circuit racing and I was a bit of a crasher when I first started. As you are, you're finding the limits, you're figuring it out. And honestly, if you're not crashing in your early days of racing, you're not going to be fast. That's what I was like. I went over there with Mark Livingston, this guy who is the RAF champion, the RAF's top TT rider and all this kind of thing. So I went over there as a mechanic for him in 92 and I watched this and I came away thinking, fuck that. It was really dangerous looking, and I knew that with my temperament at the time, and I was like, not happening. I eventually decided to go over there. I'd stopped crashing quite as much. I was into British 600s by this time, a few years into British 600s. Wasn't crashing half as much as I used to, and I thought, yeah, I'll give it a go. So I went over there and I did the Manx Grand Prix newcomers race. Out I go and win the race. Get to the end of the race, and I can still remember the commentator who interviewed me on TV. There's a Duke video somewhere out there, a kind of library of crustiness. And this Duke video guy sticks the microphone in front of me. He said, Gordon, you've just come over here and you've won the race. And I was something like 5 minutes ahead of the guy who won the 750 race. And that wasn't particularly because I was going fast. There were like 3 of us who were pretty close to each other. I was only 8 seconds ahead of the guy behind me. But he said, well, we're going to see you back. We're going to see you back at the Manx Grand Prix or the TT next year. And I said, nope, that's it. I've done it. I've won it. I've got the T-shirt. You'll never see me again. And then for the next 8 years, I went over there and I raced.
John McGuinness of this parish in which Noel and I lives down the road. He's 52 years old and he's showing no signs of giving it up. He's younger than us. I just want him to stop. He obviously still loves it. Why is he carrying on?
Honestly, John, before he started racing, he was a brickie from Morecambe, isn't it? I think. Wasn't earning big money, started racing, did very well. Obviously, really found his feet at the TT. I think it's fair to say John wasn't the best of short circuit racers. Pretty good, but, not your Troy Bayliss or your Neil Hodgson. He then went over and found his feet at the TT, and the prize money over there is actually astronomical. Out of everything I did in the year, that was my big payday. And we worked out that if you went over there and won every race you entered, which Dave Jeffries was doing and then John McGuinness then sort of began to do, there was something like 85 grand would end up in your back pocket. And that's only on the start money I was on, because you get start money just when you turn up. If you're a name that they want there, then they give you start money just for turning up and riding. Clearly they'd stop giving you start money if you were a bit crap after that, so you can't just turn up and kind of wally around at the back. But the point is, with all this kind of start money, prize money, etc., he's earning a decent wage out of it. This is my opinion. I mean, if John's listening to this, I apologise.
Doubt it.
I know John very well. He probably hasn't got another avenue for anything that's going to make him anything like the sort of money that he would do. I can remember back in the day, I was sat chatting with Mike Rutter and Paul Marrow-Brown, a couple of pretty damn good riders. I was talking about turning full pro, because I was kind of semi-pro because I was in the Air Force, but I was also riding as a full-time pro. And the Air Force put me into a supernumerary position. So my primary role was racing motorbikes, and I would just turn up and and fix aircraft when I wasn't racing motorbikes. So a pretty good deal, to be honest. But I was having a bit of a hard time off my boss at work. You got there every now and then. He just didn't like that I was always off racing bikes. So I was looking at turning pro full time, talking to Mike Rutter and Mara Brown, and they said, you're a fucking idiot if you do it, because you've got job security, you've got something to go to afterwards, and you've got a pension. And actually, we don't have any of those things. And it was the best advice I ever had, because actually I only probably then raced from that moment when we said that, that was about 2001. I probably only stayed racing at the top level for about another 3 or 4 years. And actually I'd kind of hit my peak by then. You don't know you've hit your peak until you go down the downward slope. But I sort of gradually started going down the downward slope, and then I packed it in about 4 years later. And I thought, wow, well, thank God I didn't turn pro. I had the career to fall back on. I'm still in the Air Force.
So what made you retire from racing?
TT was the first thing to go, and what happened was I was riding a bike and we had a few problems with it. It was more the way we had prepped it, I guess. It was a guy who owned this bike, quite unbelievably, it was his road bike, and he basically said to me, will you race this at the TT? It's a bit of a weird thing to do, but there we go. He did. I think he wanted the kudos that he'd raced at the TT. So I raced this thing at the TT, and we were having problems, as I always did, with using too much fuel around the TT. So we ended up having to cut and shut the tank, and we had a piece of aluminium over the top of the tank instead of a tank cover. Things weren't really sort of going that well that year. I'm on the production bike, which was this guy's street bike, in the senior race. So up against all the factory bikes and so on and so forth. And I'm sat in 7th place. The rear shock blows, as in the back end just started bouncing all over the place. It was almost unrideable. I saw the pit board and I saw P7, and I thought, if I can just hold on and stay in the top 10, then I'll get X amount of money. And we're not talking big money. We're talking go and flip burgers in McDonald's for, a few shifts a week. And that's the sort of money I'm talking about, a few £1,000. And so I clung on and I finished 8th and ended up, when we looked at the lap times, with this blown shock, my lap time would have been as fast as the lap record from 2 years previous on this type of bike. When I got into the paddock at the end, the hugger, that covers the back tyre, was literally dripping with oil. And the back of the bike was just, there was no oil in the shock whatsoever. It was just a spring. My mechanic tried to ride it down he did ride it down the paddock to the motorhome. He came back, he was like, how the hell have you just ridden that? That's unrideable in the paddock. And I stood there looking at this and I thought, what a fucking idiot. I'd always tried to ignore the prize money because it's not the sort of thing you want to be thinking about, but we'd begun to rely on it for holidays and, that kind of thing. And it was the prize money that had kept me going. I realized at that moment I was going to kill myself. So I just thought, right, that's it, I'm done. On the Friday race, rather than going to the Villa Marina and doing a proper prize presentation, they just present the prizes out the back of the grandstand. So I got up, Fred Clark standing there, he's well done, shakes my hand, got my 8th place silver replica, and I said, Fred, can I just take the microphone for a second?
You love doing that.
So yeah, I do that, don't I? Yeah. So I took the microphone and said, that's it, I'm retiring from the TT, not going to come back again. And I did it publicly so that I'd forced myself into sticking with it, and that was it. I never went back to the TT.
So at some point there was a transition from racer to, what are your motorcycle pronouns now?
Well, my current motorcycle pronouns are, I could really do with going to the toilet. Can we just have a quick 2-minute break? I guess I'm an adventure rider first and foremost. Obviously, I do a bit of trials and I do a bit of enduro. Adventure riding is just lit my fire. You see Adam Reamond's videos, and he did a video called Freedom Machines. I talk to myself a lot when I'm riding. I don't know whether I'm the only one who's that mad. Freedom Machine is just something that sort of constantly comes out my mouth, because you find yourself in the most amazing places, normally where you feel privileged because there's no other normal people in there. You've got to be an avid hiker or a mountain biker or something like that. And even if you're one of those things, you don't cover the amount of terrain that we do. For example, I did the Pyrenees this year just gone. Length of the Pyrenees on the ACT, don't tell John Ross. Ended up just in these most amazing places with your jaw on the floor, just going, who else gets to see this stuff apart from adventure riders? And I'm not sure many people really do get to see that breadth and the changes in landscape that you get from one end of the Pyrenees to the middle to the other. I walked into a pharmacy because I had a weird banging headache, that's just not me at all, but I did. And I walked in this pharmacy, and I'm in Spain as far as I'm concerned. I speak Spanish. They don't understand me. Turned out I'm in France. I don't know when I got into France, but we did. It weaves in and out. The ACT weaves in and out of France and Spain. And after a while, we learned to look at the car registration plates on the side of the road, because the guy I was riding with, Dempster Hamilton, his wife's French, so he speaks pretty good French. So if we saw French number plates, he'd order the coffees, and if we saw Spanish ones, then I'd order the coffees badly in Italian, because that kind of works. Although, remind me about a story about stuffed peppers when I was with Biker Ed in the Pyrenees a few years back. I'm not allowed to forget it.
As a former 1000cc superbike rider, what is currently in the garage?
Yamaha T7 is the bike in the garage. Now, for adventure riding, it's not the best thing out there. And I'm just going to lay it out, because everyone says, what oil pressure should I run in my left boot for my tech bike or whatever. In my opinion, the best tech bike on the planet currently is the Honda CRF 300 Rally.
So you used to have a CRF, didn't you?
I had a CRF 250 Rally, modified suspension and a rack on it, but other than that, it was stock. What a great bike. The 250 Rally lacked a bit of bottom end punch. That was the only thing, the only sort of thing I would level at it. The only criticism I would level at it was that. I think the 300 addresses it to some point, but not sure why Honda haven't brought out. Put that Himalayan engine, for example, in a CRF Rally with actually the Himalayan suspension would do. It's damn good. And hey, that's it. You've got your unicorn right there. I'm struggling to understand why Honda, Yamaha, BMW, you name it, why aren't you doing something? It's very strange.
Why did you change to the T7?
The T7 replaced the GS Trophy bike. So I had the 1200 GS, which is the one I bought from after doing the BMW GS Trophy World Championship, bought the bike afterwards. And if I'm honest, it started to develop a bit of a grumbly something. I thought it was drive shaft. It might not have been. It all started to feel a bit expensive. I was like, I had a bit of a look round to see what else was around. I was looking at secondhand T7s, and as you do when you start to look for adverts for this kind of stuff, up pop some new adverts for new bikes, and there was a great deal. I called up the dealer and went, what would you give me for this bike? It's a bit unusual. The headline is an import. A lot of dealers wouldn't touch it. They weren't interested. But this dealer got really excited about the fact it was a GS Trophy bike. So it's like a Camel Trophy Land Rover, And so he gave me an astonishing amount of money for it, which meant that they paid me £7 to give them a 1200 GS that had ridden the TET in 7 countries and obviously done the GS Trophy and ridden through a jungle, and I rode away on a brand new T7. I thought, well, you can't really argue with that. So the T7 was bought to replace the GS, and the intention was not to take this thing off-road. I had the CRF Rally, which is my tech bike, and that was exactly what I bought it for. And then, as you do, having said I'm not taking the T7 off-road, I was like, well, I'll just go and have a ride on it and see what it's like. And I was like, oh, this is all right, actually. It's not bad. I then realised I kind of had one too many bikes, which sounds like a weird thing, especially for Noel. But so what I realised was that I'd stopped enjoying trail riding in the UK. Now, that's not because of the UK. It's just in your local area. After a while, and I found this back when I raced enduro as well, it just became not challenging. So, and the better the bike that you're on, the less challenging it is and the less fun it is, which sounds a weird thing, but if you raced enduro, then you it's not challenging anymore, if that makes sense. Now, if you're riding the TET in the Pyrenees, you don't know what's around the next corner. It's amazing, and it's all about the journey. The terrain is interesting, but in general, that's sort of not why you're there. I started to trail ride in the UK again, and I found that after a few months of doing this, I was just riding the same trails again and again and again. I was like, oh, this is just, honestly, it was just boring. And I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I sold the CRF Rally, kept the T7 because that's the one I can do absolutely everything on, take the kids on the back and, all that kind of thing. Because I've done a few tech trips with the kids on the back. The Rally got sold and I bought 2 trials bikes instead. So one for the kids, one for me. And that meant that then I could have the hit of riding challenging terrain on a trials bike. And when you go into trials competitions, the great thing is it never gets dull, because I've literally ridden trials competitions where I was lining up with this guy on a Sherco who seemed, he had all the gear on. I thought, is he all the gear and no idea? Wasn't really sure. He seemed to be quite good. He seemed to know what he was doing. So I got chatting to him and I started asking him for tips, because I need tips because I'm a crap trials rider. He was giving me some hints and tips and so on and so forth, and everything he told me seemed to work. Well, it turned out to be a bloke called Jack Peace, who's the current British trials champion, and he was something like the 2016 world 125 champion as well, so quite handy. But the point is, I can line up next to this guy, and he's riding some flags which take him all over the difficult obstacles, the crazy stuff that looks impossible, whereas my flags ride around all the difficult obstacles and miss them all out. But then if you get a bit better, then the flags go over some of the difficult obstacles. Do you see what I mean? So that you're always challenged, no matter how good you are. Even a world champion is challenged at the same event that Nobber like me is riding at.
You're unusual in the respect that we talk to a lot of people who ride bikes who don't embrace many genres of motorcycling, but it sounds like you do.
Yeah, I kind of realised at some point in my life, I think it was probably when I took up the road racing, because I didn't take up road racing until I was, it was the day before my 21st birthday. And to me, that was just a thing that other people did. And, well, I can't do that. And it wasn't until I got almost forced into it by Mark Livingston that I ended up realizing that, well, of course you can do this. And that just, it opened a sort of world out to me where I went, well, you can just do this stuff. So what I've done is that from that point on, anything that I've had an interest in, I've just gone and competed because it seems like a great thing to do. And in trials, for example, if you go and practice on a trials bike, I honestly find that really difficult because I'll look at a hill and I'll think, yeah, I can get up that. I'll either breeze up it like it's nothing, or I'll flip off the back and tumble to the ground in a heap because I don't actually understand what I can or can't do on a trials bike because their capabilities are so high and my capabilities are so low, it's really difficult to understand. Whereas you go to an event and somebody's laid out flags, in my case, I'm Clubman B, so they lay out yellow flags. A rider of my level should reasonably be able to ride through that course with a couple of dabs. That's why the competitions are so much fun. And it's the same with enduro. You know, I did a bit of car racing, paragliding, you name it. Just go and compete. And it doesn't matter if you're crap. If you've got a smile on your face, that's what matters. That's where the fun lies.
Does there always have to be an element of competition and difficulty? I mean, you're wearing a branded sweatshirt tonight. Would you ever ride one of those bikes, the cruisy bike?
It's a Harley t-shirt. Don't hate me too much. I bought the wife a Harley 883 Iron. Really cool bike, actually. Way cooler than I would have thought. Slash cuts. And I've got a YouTube channel, which is kind of nothing goes on it. The highest hit rate, my wife's bike, when I put some slash cut Vance and Hines short shots on it. And of course, she's kind of blonde chick wearing tight jeans and knee-high boots, and she's revving the bike up. And all she was doing was like, oh, these exhausts sound cool. And then she rides up and down the road a bit. And I did the world's worst editing job, but it got some ridiculous amount of 20,000 views or something like that.
Yeah, girls on bikes.
You're doing trials with your boys as well, because it's quite a sociable sport, isn't it? Because you can chat before you get into a section and after a section. Also, with the different levels, presumably you can ride with your lads as well, right?
It's the world's most sociable sport. Absolutely love it. So super friendly, super cheap, amazingly sociable. We actually rode all three of us for the first time together this weekend because I'm tight and I've only got enough money for two bikes. It's normally that is one bike at a time, if you like. What I'm getting at is I ride with one boy at a time and they take it in turns, which stops them getting too good because actually one of them kicked my ass earlier this year. He did not fucking like the walk home, I can tell you. The boys are actually about the same level as me. They're just slightly behind. And what I've said to them is that I will never let them win. Now, that sounds terrible. Everyone takes a...
Come on.
Oh, my God. You won't let them win. That's horrendous.
That's terrible.
Here's the deal. I'm saying to them, when you beat me, which they will, which one of them has, they know that they beat me. I'm never going to turn around to them and say, I wasn't really trying, because I hate that shit. And that's one of the reasons why competitions is great. There's a saying in road racing, which is when the flag drops, the bullshit stops. You go on a track day and you kick somebody's ass and they go, yeah, I wasn't really trying. Well, that's not the case in racing because everyone's trying.
Talk to us about the GS Trophy, because I don't really know what the GS Trophy is, and I'm sure lots of people listening won't know what the GS Trophy is.
The headline is it's a world championship to find which country has got the best team of adventure riders, and countries compete from all around the world to try to see who has the best team of adventure riders. The reality is that it's a shameless BMW marketing stunt where what they want to do is get a bunch of riders who can ride well and show their bikes doing cool shit so people buy them. What happens before you do the GS Trophy is a great big box of stuff turns up and you get the BMW branded suit that's made out of whale foreskin or whatever it is, that's £1 million, and they get you to wear all this stuff and ride their bikes. You're riding along in the middle of the jungle in Thailand, as I was, for example, and a drone will suddenly just appear next to you while you're riding along and track you, because that's what they're trying to get, is they're trying to get footage. So each team of adventure riders has got an embedded journalist. So we had Michael Guy from Motorcycle News with us, great guy. That's what it's all about.
On your own bike, obviously?
No, so what you do is when you compete in the UK GS Trophy, you do it on your own bike for most of the event. Then they do the tough off-road stuff, which is liable to bend a bike, and you go on the BMW off-road schools bikes. Then when you do the World Championship, we turned up in Thailand and there was a brand new 1200 GS sat there literally with my name on it, which was pretty cool, I've got to say. You jump on these bikes and run them in, riding through the jungle.
There are different stages, different events during the actual GS Trophy, isn't there? So it's not just riding. You end up doing some weird and wacky things, don't you, with the bikes as well?
Yeah, there's things like we did a wheel change competition. You've got 3 bikes lined up, and then you have to change. The wheels are like color-coded with the 3 bikes. So you then have to change the front wheels so that all 3 wheels end up in all 3 different bikes. It's put against the clock. So Team UK, when we did that, because we had myself, James Beryl, who kicks biker Ed's ass quite significantly on enduro bikes. So he's a quick lad. And then we had a guy called Ollie Twig. We could all ride a bit. I was a former aircraft engines technician. James runs his own motorbike repair shop, and Ollie built up a high sort of prestige car company, which started off through him restoring classic cars and stuff. So we were all pretty handy on the spanners. So what we did was I think we beat the BMW mechanics time. They'd set it as a stig, if you like, by a minute. And they couldn't believe it. They were like, holy shit, what have you just done? But one of the tricks was we got all 3 of the bikes lined up, pushed together, and we got Michael Guy, like some supermodel, draped over the back racks to lift the front wheels off the ground so that we didn't have to screw about with all that kind of thing. So, because Michael was like, hey, I'm shit with the spanners. You guys are all good with them. So let's go. So we kind of divvied up the jobs beforehand. One of us did brake calipers, one of us did spindle, one of us, etc., and had it all sorted. We did a bridge crossing, so it was like a broken bridge crossing type thing. There's a pretty good YouTube video out there of that. What else did we do? Dragging bikes over logs, pushing a bike forwards and backwards. That sounds really crap. We had to push all 3 bikes forwards up to a massive porcelain elephant, and then when the lead bike had touched the elephant, then you had to push them back as fast as you could. Fastest time won. But there was carnage, because actually, I don't know about you, but I've never pushed a bike backwards fast before. But the 2 other guys in the team, they'd both worked in motorbike dealerships, so they were really good at going backwards fast into bike dealerships. So they taught me how to do it, and I ended up as the rider at the front, so that I was at the back going backwards, if you like, and I just concentrated really hard on not dropping it. And that's what most people did, was one of the teams would drop it. Team UK, we finished second in the GS Trophy World Championship, but we were fairly consistently sort of like 4th, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, that kind of thing. We decided to go for the kind of consistent championship winning 2nd place thing. Unfortunately for us, Team South Africa went, fuck it, let's go for it, and they kicked our ass. So what can you say? But 2nd place isn't too bad, is it?
Do you know any of the numbers, Gordon? How many people do you think apply in the UK?
When I did the UK qualifier, then there were 271 riders entered for the UK qualifier. The top 3 came out as the Team UK. Now, the funny thing was, when I went to go and do this, what had happened was I'd inquired about a new BMW GS. I was obviously on their email system somewhere. And what happened was that an email popped into my inbox and it said, come and do the GS Trophy UK, and you could win the adventure holiday of a lifetime. And I looked at this and I thought, well, I've got a few skills on 2 wheels. I'd stopped racing, which always used to be the thing that would pay for the holidays. I hadn't been able to take the wife on holiday for a few years. So I thought, well, I've got a few skills. I'll go and have a go at this and see whether I can win this holiday. So anyway, I do the event. I finished 2nd. So I'm one of the riders who's now won the adventure holiday of a lifetime. So then they start rattling on about, there's all the BMW top brass there, and then they start rattling on about Team UK, and they're going to do this, and they're going to be in the World Championships. And I'm standing there with this quizzical look on my face thinking, well, that's all cool, but where's this holiday? Because that's what I thought I'd won. Anyway, I sidled up to one of the BMW guys, and I went, this is all cool, this Team UK thing and everything, but what about the adventure holiday? And he just gave me a weird look. So I was like, okay. So I then spoke to one of the past winners, who was a real nice guy, Nick George, and I went and had a chat with him, and I said, what's the deal with this holiday then? And he went, no, that is the holiday. And I went, oh, well, can I take the wife on the back? And he went, well, we were roping bikes down cliffs in Patagonia, so I don't think so, mate. And I'm like, oh shit. And I had the colour drained out my face because I now realise that the wife's gone back with the kids up to the caravan to go and sort stuff out. And she thinks we've just won the adventure holiday of a lifetime. And I kind of went up there and went to explain to her. And the explanation didn't go that well. She was completely convinced I'd done this on purpose. And, I eventually had to show her the email. I was like, look, this is what it says. It genuinely says that. So I was massively in the shit. And then what I ended up doing when I had no money was I had to pay for a holiday for her and her sister to go on holiday to compensate her for the loss of the holiday that I hadn't won.
What plans have you got for future adventures, Gordon?
So my son, who's just turned 17, he's got himself a mighty Ryu 125, which sounds like some cheap Chinese thing that's made of tinfoil, but it's a Spanish brand and it's got a Yamaha engine in it. It's 20 horsepower and goes really well. He and I were going to ride from here down through to southern Slovenia, hook up sort of middle of Tet Slovenia, ride back up through Tet Slovenia, and then do Tet Italy across so heading back towards the UK across the Italian Alps. Of course, his mother was absolutely horrified. He can't do that. He's on a 125. It's impossible. And then I told him about the Rory and what a sensible chap he is, and said, well, if Rory Othen can do it, then that seemed like a blueprint for success, really.
Well, there you go. Fascinating chat with Gordon. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Countdown now to the ABR 2024. Couple of weeks to go. Both Noel and I are going to be there. Do come over and say hello if you see us, especially if I'm in the bar and you've got your wallet out. Right, that's it for this week. See you next time. Thanks for listening. We really appreciate your support. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you really appreciate what we do, you could consider supporting us on Patreon or buy us a coffee. Links are available on our website, which is tampodcast.com, tampodcast.com, where we also have a limited selection of branded stuff. But either way, please keep listening and spreading the word. See you next time.